At the engagement party at the plaza in New York, under chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, my future daughter-in-law turned to the photographer and said loud enough for 200 guests to hear, "Not him. Don't put him in the family photos. He looks poor." My friends don't need to see that. The room fell into an uneasy silence. My son William looked like the air had been sucked out of him. The photographer froze, camera half raised. I just sat there in my second-hand suit, a glass of flat champagne in my hand, feeling the laughter ripple through the crowd. Some laughed nervously. Others, well, they enjoyed the cruelty. That's the moment I knew the truth about Samantha Blake, the woman my son was planning to marry. But let me step back a moment and introduce myself. My name is Thomas Caldwell. I'm 74 years old. For 4 decades, I ran Caldwell Maritime Shipping, a company that moved cargo across oceans before most people even woke up for their morning coffee. 5 years ago, I sold everything to the tune of $48 million. But I didn't buy a mansion in the Hamptons. I didn't collect yachts or throw parties for the elite. After my wife Eleanor passed away, I moved into a modest rental apartment in Brooklyn. I drove a 10-year-old Ford. I bought my shirts at Walmart. To the outside world, I looked like just another lonely widower stretching a pension check. Why? Because grief does strange things to a man. And because I wanted to see something clearly who would love me for who I was, and who would love me only if I looked rich. My son Will never pressed me about money. He knew I had once done well, but he assumed the business sale barely covered my retirement. He respected my privacy. He trusted me. But Samantha, well, she assumed something very different. She assumed I had nothing. And when people think you have nothing, that's when they show you everything about themselves. The first time I met Samantha, she barely looked at me. We were at a restaurant in Tribeca, and while she ordered a $300 bottle of wine, she told the waiter, "Oh, just bring him the house, pour something cheap." She never asked me what I wanted. She didn't even look me in the eye. I smiled politely, stayed quiet. At Will's birthday dinner a few weeks later, she sat me at the far end of the table next to the children. When I tried to join in the conversation about their new apartment hunt, she said, "It's really more for young professionals, Mr. Caldwell. You'd feel out of place there." Out of place. In my own son's future home. I let it slide. I let it all slide. But inside I was taking notes. And then, at that engagement party at the plaza with the orchestra playing Strauss and the waiters carrying trays of caviar, Samantha sealed her own fate. She looked straight at the photographer, pointed at me, and declared me unfit to be seen in her wedding album. I didn't shout. I didn't protest. I didn't even stand up. I simply buttoned my jacket, took a sip of champagne, and reminded myself of one thing: I hadn't survived 74 years on this earth without learning how to strike back when someone underestimates me. Because Samantha Blake thought I was poor. And that was her biggest mistake. Before I take you deeper into this story, let me ask you something. If your own child's fiancé humiliated you publicly like that, would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have stayed and waited for the right moment to show her who you really were? I chose the second option. And what happened next? Well, it made that glittering ballroom tremble on its very foundations. When Eleanor died 3 years ago, the world went gray. My wife of 51 years had been the lighthouse that guided me through every storm. Without her, I drifted. I stopped going to board meetings, stopped talking about business, stopped caring about appearances. What good were suits and expensive watches when the only person I wanted to impress was gone? Most mornings I walked 2 blocks from my apartment to a small brick church tucked between a laundromat and a deli. I'd sit in the last pew, staring at the flickering candles, whispering prayers that were half gratitude and half desperation. I asked God to give me patience, to show me when to act and when to stay silent. And sometimes I wondered if He'd kept me alive this long for a reason other than just enduring loneliness. That's why I didn't confront Samantha the first dozen times she showed me who she was. The first real test came at dinner. Will had taken us to a high-end restaurant in Soho. Samantha ordered a filet mignon and truffle risotto, her nails glittering with fresh diamonds Will certainly couldn't afford on a physical therapist's salary. When the waiter turned to me, she cut in before I could open my mouth. Just water for him. And maybe the cheapest red you've got. The words landed sharp, like she was talking about a beggar she felt obligated to feed. I forced a smile. I'll be fine. Later, when dessert came, she leaned across the table, her smile sweet, but her tone edged with condescension. So Thomas Will tells me you're between things right now. Have you considered senior services? They have programs for people like you. Assisted living meal delivery support groups. People like me, she said, as if I were a case study in decline. I cleared my throat. I'm managing fine. Her eyes flicked to Will, then back to me. We just want to help. A nice home, nothing fancy, but clean and safe. You'd be cared for, as though I were already half buried. I looked at my son. He shifted, uncomfortably embarrassed, but he said nothing. And that silence, it hurt more than her words. At Will's birthday, a few months later, Samantha orchestrated the seating chart, so I was at the very end of the long mahogany table squeezed between 2 restless children. When I tried to join in a conversation about their new apartment, she smiled at me as if she were humoring a child. Oh, Thomas, this is really a place for young professionals. You'd feel out of place in my own son's future. And at their engagement party, when she introduced me to her parents, the cruelty became polished and public. This is Will's father. He's been struggling since my mother-in-law passed. We're keeping an eye on him. Her mother gave me a pitying look, the kind people reserve for lost dogs. Her father barely acknowledged me at all, too busy adjusting his Rolex and talking about their summer house in the Hamptons. Every word, every gesture was a blade. But I kept my face calm, the way I had in business meetings when competitors tried to corner me. Because I wasn't just enduring, I was watching. And as I prayed in that quiet church pew the following Sunday, I realized something. Maybe this was the test God had set before me. To reveal the heart of the woman who would marry my only son. I closed my eyes, folded my trembling hands, and whispered, Lord, let me see clearly. Let me know when it is time to act. The answer didn't come in lightning or thunder. It came in patience. And patience, I knew, would be my greatest weapon. By the time spring came, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to argue with Samantha or plead with my son to open his eyes. No words weren't enough. If she could look at me, the father of the man she claimed to love, and see nothing but a burden, then I needed to show her exactly what kind of burden I could be. And I wasn't going to do it with shouting. I was going to do it with precision. One morning, I pulled out an old Rolodex from my desk drawer. Most of the names had faded over the years, producers, actors, shipping executives, but one name stood out: Jonathan Mercer. We'd known each other since the 70s. He'd gone into theater, eventually becoming a respected Broadway director with ties to some of the best makeup and stage designers in New York. I dialed his number. My hand didn't shake, not from age, but from resolve. "Thomas Caldwell," he said, when he picked up his voice, carrying that same theatrical boom I remembered. "My God, I thought you'd sailed off to Monaco by now." "No," I said. "I've been keeping things quiet, but I need a favor, Jonathan, a big one." There was a pause. "What kind of favor?" "I need to disappear. Or rather, I need to become someone else. An old man on his last legs. A man who looks weak, broken, and pitiful." Jonathan chuckled. "Thomas, you already are an old man." I smiled faintly. "Yes, but I want it to be convincing. I want people to pity me, to write me off as helpless." Jonathan was silent for a moment, then said, "I know just the people." "When do you want to start?" 2 weeks later, I was sitting under the harsh lights of a studio in Queens, my face being transformed by latex and subtle makeup. They gave me age spots, deepened my wrinkles, made my skin look sallow. A prosthetic tremor device was fitted to my right hand, so it quivered constantly, just enough to draw pity. A cane was customized for me, weighted slightly off balance, so that every step seemed hesitant. When I looked in the mirror, I almost startled myself. There was no trace of Thomas Caldwell, the shipping magnate, who once closed multi-million-dollar deals on the decks of container ships. Instead, there was a fragile old man who looked like he had 1 foot already in the grave. "Perfect," Jonathan said, studying me from every angle. "Nobody will question it." And then, as if fate itself wanted to sharpen my resolve, Samantha gave me another reminder of why I was doing this. It was a week later at Will's apartment. I had stopped by to deliver a birthday card. I paused outside the door when I heard voices inside. "Your father is going to embarrass us," Samantha was saying. "He's grieving," Sam Will replied. "He's been through a lot since Mom passed." "That's exactly my point," she snapped. "He looks like he belongs in a nursing home, not at our wedding. My friends will whisper, my family will judge. Do you want them thinking we're broke, or worse, that we're caretakers for some old invalid?" I felt the words like blows to the chest. I knocked on the door then, and the conversation went dead. When Will opened it, his face flushed with guilt. Samantha appeared behind him, wearing that polished smile she used when she wanted to hide her claws. "Thomas," she said sweetly, "we were just talking about the wedding. We want everything to be perfect for you. Perfect for me." Right. That was the moment I knew this plan wasn't just a clever trick anymore. It was necessary, so I let the disguise take root. I started wearing secondhand coats from thrift shops, shuffling when I walked, letting people think I couldn't remember names. I brought the cane everywhere. I even practiced stammering responses and vacant stares. And Samantha, she bought every bit of it. The next time we had dinner, she leaned toward Will and whispered, though I was meant to hear it, we should really look into assisted living for him. He's worse than before. I kept my eyes down, played the part, let her think she was winning. But inside I was smiling, because she had no idea that every cruel word, every dismissive glance was being recorded by a tiny camera hidden in the silver head of my cane. The trap was set. and Samantha Blake was walking straight into it. The closer the wedding came, the bolder Samantha became. She no longer bothered with polite smiles or veiled comments. The contempt dripped from her words like acid. And the more frail and forgetful I pretended to be, the more confident she grew that she could control the narrative. One evening, Will invited me over for dinner at their apartment. It was supposed to be family time. I shuffled in with my cane, moving slowly, letting my hand tremble against the doorknob. Samantha barely hid her sigh. "Careful, Thomas," she said, her tone sharper than the edge of the marble counter behind her. "We don't want you falling and suing us before the wedding." I smiled weakly, as though I hadn't heard. But I had, and so did the camera hidden in my cane. During the meal, she placed me at the far end of the table, away from Will. When dessert came, she pushed a bowl of applesauce toward me. "Something soft," she said. "So you don't choke." Will frowned. "Sam, come on. Dad can eat whatever he wants." She laughed lightly. "I'm just being thoughtful," but there was no thought in it, only malice disguised as care. I let my spoon shake against the bowl, pretending to struggle. Inside, I felt the rage coil tighter. That night, as I left their building, I whispered to myself, patience. Just a little longer. Then came the call that pushed everything past the point of no return. It was the week of the wedding. My phone rang late in the evening. The caller ID, Samantha Blake. I considered ignoring it, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Hello," I let my voice come out frail, weak. "Thomas," she said briskly, not even bothering with a greeting. "We need to talk about Saturday." "Yes, dear," she inhaled sharply. "I've thought it over, and I think it's best if you don't attend." I stayed silent, letting the pause grow uncomfortable. "You'll still see everything," she continued. "We'll have someone FaceTime you during the ceremony. It'll be just like being there." "Just like being there," I repeated, voice shaking. "Yes. You'll be comfortable, safe, and honestly, you won't embarrass Will." That was the knife, clean sharp, straight to the heart. "I want to see my son get married," I said, keeping my tone quiet, almost pleading. "Thomas, please. Be reasonable. This is a $250,000 wedding. My family is flying in from Los Angeles, Chicago, even London. Every moment will be photographed and filmed. If you show up in your condition, people will talk. They'll pity you. Worse, they'll pity Will." "Is that really what you want?" I let out a shaky sigh. "No. I don't want that." "Good. Then we're agreed. You'll stay home. You'll see everything on the live stream. I'll have Will call you after the reception." She thought she'd won. I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. But she underestimated me. "Actually," I said softly, "I'll be there." There was a pause, then a hiss. "No, you won't." "Yes, I will. If you dare show up, Thomas, I will have security remove you. I will make sure every guest sees you for what you really are, a selfish, decrepit old man desperate for attention. Do you understand me?" I let the silence linger, then whispered, "I understand." "Good," she said briskly. "I'm glad we settled this." Then I added, "But I'm coming anyway." The line went dead. For 10 minutes after, my phone buzzed with angry texts, threats, ultimatums. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I set my phone down, looked in the mirror at the man I'd become, frail, makeup, trembling, prosthetics, cane at my side, and smiled. Because Samantha had just written her own ending, and I was going to let her read it out loud in front of 200 people. If you've stayed with me through this part of the story, It really means a lot. These memories aren't easy to share, but I know some of you out there have felt the sting of being pushed aside by your own family too. So let me ask you, are you still here walking with me through it? Go ahead and type a 1 in the comments if you're still with me on this journey. It lets me know I'm not telling this story alone. The wedding day arrived with the kind of splendor only New York's wealthiest could afford. The ballroom of the St. Regis glittered with chandeliers, each crystal catching the light like frozen fire. Gold-trimmed chairs lined immaculate tables dressed in white linen. A string quartet played softly while guests in designer gowns and tuxedos sipped champagne worth more than most people's monthly rent. I shuffled in slowly, leaning heavily on my cane, letting my shoulders slump forward. My suit was deliberately shabby, wrinkled a little loose, as if I hadn't owned anything new in decades. The effect was immediate. Samantha's mother looked me up and down and frowned like she'd spotted a stain on her Hermes bag. Her father didn't even make eye contact, too busy adjusting his Rolex, as though the time mattered more than people. The usher smiled politely, but quickly guided me not to the groom's family section, not even to the middle rows, but to the very back corner behind a tall floral arrangement that blocked most of the view. They'd cleared a chair so my cane and I could fit comfortably. Out of sight, out of mind, I sat there quietly, the hum of whispers washing over me. Guests from Samantha's side strutted like peacocks in designer labels Gucci, Prada, Dior, while my side of the family trickled in, wearing simple suits and dresses. Old neighbors, some of Will's colleagues from the hospital, and a few friends who had known my wife. The contrast was almost comical warmth and authenticity versus cold display. When the ceremony began, Will stood at the altar looking handsome in his tuxedo, but his eyes kept searching. He found me eventually tucked away in the shadows and mouthed, "I love you, Dad." That moment nearly broke my act. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay hunched, fragile, hidden. Then the music changed, and Samantha entered. Her gown was a masterpiece ivory silk lace embroidered with pearls, a diamond tiara catching every flash of light. She was stunning and icy. Her gaze swept the room basking in admiration until it landed on me. For just a second, her perfect smile faltered. The muscles in her jaw tightened. Rage flickered in her eyes. She had told me not to come. And there I was anyway, a stubborn shadow she couldn't erase. The priest began his words. The vows were exchanged, and still Samantha never once looked toward me. When she promised to love my son in sickness and in health, I nearly laughed aloud at the hypocrisy. But the real test came during the photos. After the ceremony, guests were ushered toward the grand staircase for portraits. The photographer, a cheerful man with a heavy camera, looked around and spotted me. "Shall we get some shots with the father of the groom?" he asked. It should have been a simple, obvious moment. A son with his father. But Samantha's voice cut across the marble hall like a blade. "No," she snapped. "No photos with him." The photographer blinked, confused. "Ma'am." Samantha gestured toward me, her voice sharp but dripping with mock pity. "He's not photogenic right now. It would ruin the album." The silence that followed was deafening. Will stepped forward, his face flushed. "Sam, he's my father. We can at least..." She gripped his arm tightly. "Look at him, Will. Really look. Do you want those pictures framed on our wall for the rest of our lives? Do you want people asking who that frail old man is drooling in the corner?" Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at their shoes, others whispered behind manicured hands. But no one spoke up. I stayed perfectly still. My cane balanced across my lap, my eyes cast down as though ashamed. Inside, though, the fury was building like a storm. This wasn't just a private insult anymore. This was public erasure. In front of 200 witnesses, Samantha was declaring me unworthy of being seen beside my own son on the most important day of his life. And that was exactly what I had been waiting for. Because in that instant, Samantha Blake gave me all the evidence I would ever need. The trap was sprung, and she didn't even know it. I tightened my grip on the cane, feeling the hidden camera still recording. She thought she was burying me in shame. But what she was really doing was digging her own grave. After the photographer lowered his camera, and the whispers filled the marble ballroom, I sat in my corner seat, with my cane across my knees, and forced myself to breathe. My chest burned with humiliation, but underneath it was something stronger, resolve. I bowed my head, as though in shame, but what I was really doing was praying. Not for Samantha, not for the guests who had laughed nervously or looked away. I prayed for my son, for Will, who was standing at the altar bound by vows to a woman who had already revealed the rot inside her heart. In that quiet corner, surrounded by glittering gowns and champagne flutes, I whispered the only words that could steady me. Lord, let the truth be seen. Let the darkness come to light. For years after Eleanor died, I had questioned why I was still here. Why God had left me to wander through grief while she rested in peace. And now, watching Samantha parade her cruelty in front of hundreds, I understood. This wasn't about me. It wasn't even just about Will. It was about every elder who had been shoved aside, every disabled soul dismissed as an embarrassment, every forgotten man and woman treated as though they no longer mattered. Samantha had given me the chance to hold up a mirror, not only to her, but to the world. The memory of a scripture from John came to me then. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And I knew clearer than I'd known anything in years that tonight was the night the truth would be set loose. I looked across the ballroom at Will. His face was drawn, his eyes darting between me and Samantha. He loved me, I knew that. But he was already trapped by the weight of appearances, by the golden cage Samantha had built around him. I couldn't blame him for hesitating, but I could give him a way out. I thought of Eleanor too. If she had been there, she would have stood beside me unflinching. She always believed dignity was not something given, it was something claimed, and she would have told me, as she often did, Thomas, don't let anyone write you out of your own story. So I straightened my back, not all the way, not yet, but enough to feel her strength in my bones. The orchestra shifted into a new song, and Samantha swept through the room, gathering compliments like petals on her gown. She smiled, for the cameras laughed too loudly at her father's jokes, all while making sure I stayed tucked in the shadows. But I had already decided before the night was done, the shadows would become the spotlight. This wasn't just vengeance, it was revelation. And I believed with every ounce of my being that God had placed me here in this ballroom, filled with false smiles and borrowed diamonds, to shine a light on what arrogance and cruelty really looked like when stripped bare. I tightened my grip on the cane, the tiny hidden lens still recording. The evidence was piling up moment by moment. Patience, I whispered under my breath. Not yet, but soon. And as I whispered, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. because I wasn't just planning a reckoning. I was fulfilling a calling. Dinner was served under the glow of chandeliers, the smell of roasted lamb and saffron rice filling the ballroom. Guests murmured in polite tones, their forks clicking softly against porcelain. Samantha sat at the head table, radiant in her gown, laughing as though nothing had happened. I stayed hunched at the back, spooning mashed potatoes slowly, as if I could barely manage it. My cane lay across my lap, its hidden camera capturing everything, the sneers, the whispers, the pitying looks. Every insult was preserved, every cruelty documented. And then when the time came for toasts, Samantha rose from her seat. She tapped her crystal glass against the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing across the room. "Thank you for being here on this perfect day. Will and I are so grateful for your love and support. We couldn't imagine celebrating without you." The applause was polite, rehearsed. But before we begin the official speeches, she continued, her eyes flicking briefly to me. "I feel it's important to address something. Many of you have noticed Will's father tonight." A hush fell over the crowd. She gestured toward me. "Thomas hasn't been well. Since his wife passed, his health has declined. Sometimes he forgets things. Sometimes he struggles to keep up. We debated whether he should be here at all, but we decided to let him join us for this special day. So if you see him struggling, don't be alarmed." The words were sugar-coated venom, and they echoed through the microphone, amplified for everyone to hear. My humiliation packaged as compassion. Samantha raised her glass. "To family in all its forms." Polite applause again. But the air was heavy, uncomfortable. And then it happened. A woman in the crowd stood up, Dr. Margaret Klein, one of Will's colleagues from the hospital. Her voice was firm, cutting through the murmurs. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm a neurologist. And I've been observing Mr. Caldwell tonight. His so-called symptoms don't align with any post-stroke patient I've ever treated." A ripple spread across the room. Before Samantha could respond, another voice joined in, deep, authoritative. "I agree." It was Dr. Richard Blake, Samantha's own uncle, a renowned neurologist at Mount Sinai. He stepped forward, eyes narrowed. His posture, his grip, strength, his eye tracking, none of it matches what you've described, Samantha. Something doesn't add up. Samantha's face drained of color. She tried to laugh it off. "This isn't appropriate." But her uncle cut her off. "What's not appropriate is making public medical statements about your fiancé's father without evidence, especially statements dripping with condescension." Guests whispered, phones raised to record. The tension was thick enough to choke on. That was my moment. I reached down and twisted the silver head of my cane. The hidden tremor device powered down. My hand stilled. Gasps rippled through the tables closest to me. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself to my feet. The room froze. I set the cane aside, stood tall, straightened my jacket. My voice rang clear and steady, no trace of the frailty I had performed for months. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Thomas Caldwell, and I have something to say about the woman who just married my son." A collective gasp echoed like thunder. Samantha's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. "This frail, pitiful man you've been whispering about." I gestured to the empty cane. "He never existed. He was a test, a performance, a disguise built with the help of some of the finest stage designers in New York. The trembling hands, the hunched back, the confusion, it was all makeup and prosthetics. Gasps turned to murmurs, then to shocked silence. Why I continued. Because I wanted to see the truth. I wanted to see how Samantha Blake would treat a man she believed had nothing. A man she thought was weak, poor, and disposable. I wanted to see her character when she thought no one was watching. I pulled a phone from my jacket, tapped the screen. Her voice poured from the speakers, captured crystal clear by the Kane's hidden mic. He'll ruin the photos. He looks like a burden. He belongs in a nursing home. Another clip. If he comes, I'll have security remove him. And then the cruelest, he's just a vegetable. The ballroom gasped as the words hung in the air, undeniable damning. I let the silence stretch. Then I smiled coldly. But here's what Samantha didn't know. I am not poor. I am not dying. And I am not disposable. I sold my shipping empire for $48 million. I have investments, properties, royalties, and I had planned to give it all, every last dollar, to my son and the family he built. Gasps again, louder this time. Samantha staggered back, clutching the edge of the table for balance. But not anymore, I said, voice sharp as steel. I opened my laptop on the head table, connected to the projector. My bank account filled the screen, numbers glowing, 482034. With steady hands, I typed in transfers $5 million to the Alzheimer's Association, $2 million to Paralyzed Veterans of America, $1 million each to 3 elder care charities, $10 million gone just like that. The crowd erupted in whispers and shocked laughter. Some applauded. Others simply stared. As for the remaining $43 million, I said it is now bound by a condition. My son William will inherit it only if he divorces Samantha Blake within 90 days. If not, every dollar goes to charity. Will's face went pale, torn between disbelief and horror. Samantha opened her mouth to object, but no words came. Ladies and gentlemen, I concluded this is not about money. It's about dignity. The dignity my wife believed in. The dignity that no one, no matter how rich or beautiful, has the right to strip away. I looked at Samantha one last time. You failed the test. Spectacularly. The ballroom exploded, not with applause, not with music, but with the sound of a perfect life shattering into pieces. The silence after my words was the kind that hums in your bones. 200 guests sat frozen, their forks halfway to their mouths, their champagne glasses trembling. Somewhere in the corner, the quartet faltered bows, sliding across strings in a discordant whimper before the music collapsed entirely. Samantha stood at the head table, her face drained of color, her hand gripping the edge of the linen like she might tear it in two. For a moment she tried to smile, as though she could charm her way out of what had just happened. But her lips trembled. The mask was gone. Thomas, she stammered. This is a misunderstanding. I was under stress. You know how brides get before the wedding enough. My voice was calm but sharp, the way I used to speak when a deal was falling apart in the boardroom. This wasn't stress. This was cruelty. And now the world knows it. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats. Phones were raised everywhere. Videos were already uploading, hashtags being born in real time. The evidence was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone in that ballroom, and soon everyone online. Will stood frozen beside his new wife. His face was pale, his tuxedo suddenly looking too tight. He turned toward me, eyes wide, searching. Dad, You don't need to say anything, son. I said, softening my tone for him alone. Not yet. 90 days. That's your choice. Take the time you need. Samantha snapped her head toward him, panic flaring in her eyes. Well, you can't let him do this to us. He's manipulating you. He's crazy. But then Dr. Richard Blake, her uncle, stepped forward. His voice carried authority tinged with disappointment. No, Samantha. What's crazy is the way you've spoken tonight. To call any human being a vegetable, to strip them of dignity in front of others, that's beyond cruel. That's unforgivable. Her eyes widened, desperate. Uncle Rich, please. He shook his head, stepping back. I won't defend you. That was when the dam broke. Guests began standing chairs, scraping across marble. Some shook their heads in disgust as they walked toward the exits. Others stayed only long enough to whisper to one another, pity in their eyes, not for me, but for Will. Can you believe she said that, one woman murmured. On camera, no less, another replied. This will be everywhere by morning. Samantha's father stood red-faced, tugging at his collar. We should leave, he muttered, trying to herd his wife and daughter toward the back. But Samantha refused to move her nails, digging into Will's arm. You're not walking away from me, she hissed. Not after everything I planned. Not after this wedding cost $250,000. The words hung in the air like poison. Guests gasped audibly. She hadn't just admitted her priorities, she had carved them into stone for everyone to hear. Will finally pulled his arm free. He looked at her, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before, clarity. Sam, he said quietly, this isn't about money. This is about who you really are. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. The tears finally spilled, streaking her flawless makeup into black rivers down her cheeks. As more guests filed out, some clapping me on the shoulder, some whispering prayers of support, Samantha collapsed into her chair. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. The glittering tiara in her hair now looked less like a crown and more like a cage. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom had emptied. What had been planned as a night of elegance had dissolved into a scene of ruin, half-eaten plates, champagne glasses, abandoned flower arrangements left behind like evidence of a crime. I walked slowly toward the exit, no longer hunched, no longer trembling. My steps were steady, deliberate. As I passed the head table, I paused just long enough to look at Samantha. You wanted me hidden, I said softly. Now you're the one the whole world will see. Her sobs echoed in the cavernous hall as I turned and walked out into the cool Manhattan night. In the lobby, reporters were already gathering, tipped off by guests who had uploaded the footage. A young journalist thrust a microphone toward me. Mr. Caldwell, can you comment on what just happened? I buttoned my jacket, looked straight into the cameras, and said, what you saw tonight wasn't about money. It was about dignity. And no one, no matter how wealthy or beautiful, has the right to take that from another person. The flash of cameras lit the lobby like a storm. Behind me, the ballroom doors slammed shut. The night was over for Samantha Blake. But for me and for Will, the real story was just beginning. 3 months passed, like a long winter thaw. The scandal of that wedding night did not fade, it grew. Clips of Samantha calling me a vegetable racked up millions of views online. Headlines screamed across every platform: New York bride humiliates father-in-law, loses millions. Hashtags trended for weeks. Hospitals and medical boards couldn't ignore it. By the end of the first month, Samantha was suspended from her position in healthcare administration. By the end of the second, her license was under review. And then on day 85, Will filed for divorce. I remember the phone call. His voice was tired but clear. "Dad," he said, "I signed the papers today." There was no celebration in his tone, just relief. Relief and sorrow. When the divorce was finalized, Samantha walked away with nothing. No alimony. No claim to the fortune she'd once thought she was marrying into. Just a ruined reputation and legal bills she could barely afford. Last I heard, she was working retail in Arizona under her maiden name, hiding from the shadow of her own choices. Will began to heal. Slowly, painfully, but surely. One crisp autumn afternoon, we met at a small diner in Brooklyn, the kind with vinyl booths and coffee that tastes the same no matter how long it sits on the burner. It was the kind of place Eleanor and I used to take him when he was a boy. He slid into the booth across from me, the weight on his shoulders noticeably lighter. "Dad," he said, "there's something I want to tell you." I set down my coffee. "Go on." He pulled a small photo from his wallet and handed it to me. A woman smiled back from the picture, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, warm eyes scrubs still on from her shift. "Her name's Dr. Sarah Martinez," Will said. "She works in pediatric rehabilitation. We met at the hospital a few weeks after everything. She knows the whole story. I told her on our second date." I raised an eyebrow. "And what did she say?" Will smiled softly. "She said any man whose father would spend $200,000 faking a disability just to test someone's character probably learned something important about love." For the first time in months, I laughed. A deep, honest laugh. "Smart woman," I said. "She is." Will nodded. "And she asked me if you would walk her down the aisle. Her father passed away last year." My throat tightened. "I'd be honored," I whispered. We sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the coffee machine filling the air. For once, the silence was comfortable. When the waitress set down our plates, Will reached across the table and took my hand. "Dad, I want you to know. I don't care about the money, the trust, the inheritance, that doesn't matter. What matters is you taught me to open my eyes, to see people for who they really are." I squeezed his hand. "That was always the point, son. Money is a tool. Dignity is the treasure." Outside the window, the city bustled on yellow cabs, honking people rushing down sidewalks, life continuing as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. My son had chosen wisely. He had chosen love that saw past appearances, love that recognized worth, not in dollars or photos, but in the heart. The Caldwell Foundation for Elder Dignity, which I had launched with $10 million, was already hosting events at medical schools, teaching young doctors how to speak about patients with respect. I'd been invited to speak at conferences, universities, even churches. The story of that wedding had grown beyond us. It had become a lesson, a warning, and a movement. But in that diner booth, it wasn't the cameras or charities that mattered. It was Will, my boy, free, wiser, and ready to begin again. When we left, the autumn wind tugged at our coats. Will clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "You were right, Dad. The truth did set me free." And as we walked down that Brooklyn street together, I thought of Eleanor and I smiled. Because she would have been proud of both of us. Not long after that diner conversation, I found myself standing in the quiet garden of St. Mark's Church, the same brick chapel where I had whispered so many prayers after Eleanor passed. The leaves had begun to turn gold and scarlet, drifting down around the old stone benches. I closed my eyes and let the cool wind brush across my face. For the first time in years, my heart felt light. Lord, I prayed softly, thank you for giving me the strength to endure humiliation without lashing out in anger. Thank you for reminding me that justice doesn't always come from the courtroom. It can come from truth revealed in your time. I thought back to that ballroom, the chandeliers, the expensive gowns, the whispers, and Samantha's sharp words that had cut into me. And then I thought of how, in the end, the truth had stood taller than any insult. She had wealth on display, but no dignity. And dignity, I realized, is not given by man, it's a gift from God. And it cannot be stolen unless you hand it over willingly. In the weeks that followed, the Caldwell Foundation grew beyond my expectations. Donations poured in not just from wealthy patrons, but from ordinary people who had watched the video online and felt moved. Retired nurses sent checks for $20. Veterans mailed handwritten notes with $10 bills tucked inside. One child even sent a crayon drawing with the words, "Grandpas matter." Every contribution, small or large, reminded me that dignity is universal. No one is too poor, too old, or too broken to deserve respect. And my son, my Will, was healing. He had stepped away from the cage Samantha had built, and with Sarah by his side, he looked more like the boy I raised, the one Eleanor and I had prayed over at night, than he had in years. Watching him rebuild gave me a quiet peace that no fortune could buy. As I walked out of the church garden that afternoon, I passed an elderly man in a wheelchair, his granddaughter pushing him along the sidewalk. He caught my eye, and for a moment we exchanged a look of recognition. Two men who knew the weight of being seen as less than because of appearances. He smiled faintly. I tipped my hat. That simple moment confirmed everything. My life's work wasn't shipping cargo across oceans anymore. It was carrying a message that every person, regardless of age or ability, carries God-given worth. And maybe that was why the Lord kept me here after Eleanor left to speak when others could not. So if you're listening now, I want to leave you with this thought. Money fades, beauty fades, even health fades. But dignity, the way we treat others, that lasts forever. And I'd like to ask you a favor from one storyteller to another. If you believe that no one, no father, no mother, no elder, no soul should ever be dismissed as worthless, then join me here. Stay with me. Share these stories. Because together we can make sure the next Samantha who tries to trample someone's dignity will think twice. So if you agree with me, hit that subscribe button and stay on this journey. We've got more stories to tell, and I'd be honored to have you with me for the next one. I lifted my eyes to the sky, then the sun breaking through the clouds just enough to cast a warm glow across the church garden. And I whispered one final prayer. Eleanor, if you can hear me, I hope you're proud. Because I finally understand. It was never about the money. It was always about the truth. And with that, I walked on steady and unafraid, carrying not just my fortune but my faith into the work that was waiting ahead.